Can this please stop? Look at the little boy trying his hardest. I used to love bedtime stories. David brought a rock to a sword fight. Motherfucker. I guess there are some Christians who still read. I don't understand why this imagery is so hard for so many religious people across the generations to picture in their heads, when there's literally a book describing the details. This is going to offend some people. See, first of all, back in the day, the Israelites didn't have a king, and they wanted a king. And God was perplexed, like the divine entity over all the universe was perplexed at this, because he's like, I'm him. But do you do photo ops, though? And contrary to religious belief, God actually has a sense of humor, and it's very cruel. If pain equals humor, cover your ears when he's talking, okay? God responded to this by finding a guy that looks like a cartoonish copy of a king, like a comic book hero of a king. God looked through Israel and found a guy that had been raised as a rich kid and knew how to boss people around. And he looked like that. The book actually says that King Saul, or soon-to-be King Saul, stood head and shoulders above everybody else. And when he was in a crowd, he just drew attention. He just had that kind of charisma. But he had social anxiety like crazy. People would look up at him and be like, you look like a king, bro. Like a king of the world. And he'd be like, please stop talking to me. Whenever his anxiety got the better of him, the Holy Spirit would come on him, and then he would just go into like pre-workout mode. At one point, several tribes of Israel ignored his request to assemble. God came into him. He took his own sword, went into his stable, and just hacked a cow to pieces, and sent all the pieces by himself to each tribe, and said, if you don't show up, this is what all your livestock is going to look like. By me. And upon the realization that he had the physical capacity to carry out his threat, they showed up the next day. But he wasn't the main character of this story. Some time passes and Saul finds himself in a bit of a predicament. There's a guy on the enemy team that is saying that if anybody can defeat him, the entire war is won. And Saul stayed in his frickin' chair. Meanwhile, there's a hillbilly picking fights with the other soldiers in the camp. Now, when you're in a situation where it's just a bunch of guys, and it's just a bunch of guys who are known for kicking ass, and it's a bunch of guys who are known for kicking ass, and there's some kind of a quandary going on where names are being thrown like coward and big. Throwing hands is actually one of the stages of conflict resolution for those who don't know. And when said knuckle draggers resort to complaining to their boss about the person calling names, what the fuck does he look like? There were enough Stone Age Israeli Special Forces soldiers complaining up the chain of command that eventually Saul heard about this guy. Excuse me, sir. There's a guy bothering people in the camp, and he says, you're a bitch. Bring him to me now. David was escorted to King Saul's tent without resistance, mind you, and it took Saul one look at him to think, you want a job? And David goes, oh, well, since I have your permission to whoop ass, sure, yeah, fine. King Saul proceeds to give David all his weapons and his armor, and the book says when the buckles had been cinched, David thought, no. If you don't get this OSHA regulation bullshit off of me right now. Anyway, fast forwarding a couple years after that, David gets into a little social dispute with Saul, in which case he has to jump out of a freaking window to escape being murdered by the king. And unfortunately for King Saul, King David knew how to get along with the ladies. King Saul's daughter helps David escape, and how she did this is greatly overlooked, people. God, I don't mean no disrespect, but when the soldiers went to look for David, they checked the princess's bedroom. Expecting this, the princess had taken one of the life-size idols of a god made out of brass and or stone, laid it in her bed, tucked it in, took sheep's wool, put it on the head, and when the soldiers came, she said, "Shh, he's sleeping. He doesn't like to be disturbed when he's sleeping." A company of grown-ass men who were the personal bodyguard of the king of Israel looked at the statue of a literal god in bed and went, "Yep, that's David. Anyway, what do we do now?" So if we ignore the fact that David wrestled the lion and survived, chose the bear over the girl, psyched out the entire army of Israel and Canaan, carried a 15-pound sword like he was Kratos, flat out rejected a highly prized and coveted trophy of war because he could have done that himself, it is biblical canon that David was tall, broad, lean, handsome, curly-haired, and just looked like trouble. Are you seeing it yet? How about now? So to recap, I don't understand why Christians are so comfortable with this blatant disrespect towards God, his people, and stories, and just anyone who's a book nerd, for crying out loud, let alone why children are allowed to read this story. But if you're gonna cast anybody to play the role of a guy like that, those are the types of builds that you need to start with. Also, their personality. Like, your personality, when you're that kind of a person, is just totally different than just some guy, okay? Inaccuracies like this are why so much of Christian music and literature is just total cringe to me. It's so... A socio-equivalent would probably be... So Gandalf, Harry Potter, and Spock went down the magical yellow brick road to find the secret ingredients to Twix. Dear Christians, please read your own books.